Right, let's give this a go. This is hemming. I don't think I've ever explained this on a video before, so we'll just see how it goes. So here's my piece of nice spotty fabric. This is the right side, this is the wrong side, and I've got a raw edge that needs hemming. So what I would do first is I will turn it over. So I've got the wrong side facing upwards. Also, please excuse the state of my hands and my fingernails. They are not video worthy, but that's just the state of life. Depending on how much you want to turn over, how big your hem needs to be, you're going to fold, make a fold in the fabric. Now, I was going to actually show you a hem that was already done to give you an idea of what it might look like. So hold on, bear with me. See if I can get that to focus in. There we go. That is a very basic machine stitched hem. You can see the stitching on the wrong side and you can see it on the right side. So although that is functional, it's not necessarily the most, what's the word? It's not the most technical way of doing it, probably not the proper way of doing it, certainly not authentically Tudor. So that's how I hem my things because I like to do it quickly on a machine. Here's another one that I had pulled out, slightly different. If you look on the wrong side, so I'm just unravelling the garment. Look on the wrong side, focus it in again. You can see that the width that I've turned over is much bigger this time, but my stitching is right up here, along right near the edge of the fold, which I think makes it neater really. And there you can see it just there on the right side. Either way, folding over is your first, things are falling apart, sorry, is your first job. So you might be looking for a really small hem or an almost, sometimes hems are rolled almost, they're really, really tiny. So you might want almost a rolled hem, which is a tiny fold and then a tiny second fold. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to make this much, much bigger. So you can make a fold and then you can finger press it, which does leave you with a crease in the fabric, as you can see, but it's not nearly as good as ironing it. This is where I said your iron is your best friend. But so you give it a bit of a finger press, but then take it to your ironing board and get an iron on that. People in my sewing course also asked me how I get straight lines to be. It's difficult because I do it by eye and I'm quite happy with how straight that is. But if it's not something that comes easily to you, judging how straight something is by eye, then I don't really know what to say. You can obviously measure from the opposite side of the fabric to see if you've measured it correctly, but a fabric is often not, even if you line it up with the print, it's often not printed square, or the warp and the weft, particularly if you've got woven linen, might be slightly off. So just following those lines might not give you a square either. I really think, I mean, you could line up against the edge of something straight, couldn't you? But I do think doing it by eye is probably the best. So you've got one fold like that, and then you want a second fold. That can either be the same width or it can be bigger, as long as when you sew, you're going to be sewing through 3 thicknesses of fabric. If you're doing it by machine, if you're doing it by hand, you'll obviously be working on this very front edge here. So I'm going to do a Blue Peter style. Here's one I made earlier. That was my first fold and I've ironed that. That is my second fold and I've ironed that. And now from the front, this will now look like a lovely hemmed garment when we're finished. So if I was sewing, I would now put that under the machine and I would sew wherever I wanted to, either very, very close to that edge there or down the middle, wherever I felt confident. Ironing really helps in that you don't have to pin it. It's holding itself quite nicely there. You don't have to pin it. If you do want to pin it, for machine sewing, just in case you're ever interested, you pin that way. If your sewing is coming down this way, it's going under the machine and the stitches are coming down this way, your pins go in perpendicular to the line of stitching, like that. If you're hand sewing, you probably want to put them in so being right-handed, I would hold my fabric this way, and I would probably want to pin like that. So I can quickly whip them out once I've gone past. I don't need them anymore. So I've put a much finer thread in. This is a piece of cotton I'm sewing on. And I think for something like this, I would probably start at the bottom and I would work my way up. So I should probably do that. There we go. There's the bottom of the fabric. So a bit like I showed you in the last video, I'm going to try and catch up. I'm going to pause every now and again to try and refocus the video on what I'm doing. Catch up a couple of threads of this side and a couple of threads of that side, and this is where, you know what, you could do this even better actually. To fasten your thread on, you can really use a bit of fabric that's going to be nowhere near visible. So scrap that and do this. 1, 2, 3 little stitches just on that folded bit, because that's going to be right inside, no one's going to see it. Nice and tight, and then you can take your needle, I'll bring that up there. I'm just want to come out right on the folded edge. So when I put it back down, I'm in the right place to start. So then I'm looking for tiny stitches that catch up a couple of threads of the main fabric. There. I don't know if you can see that, it's so tiny. Just keep trying to refocus the screen. And then a couple of threads of this folded edge. There. And that's your first stitch. And then you'll go down. There's probably a million different ways to do this. I would then be trying to make this stitch quite straight. So I'll go down next to where I've come out from and then make the diagonal, make the progression as I move up. Like that. I'm not explaining it very well. So that I'll go down here, going from left to right in a tiny straight stitch, catch those 2 threads, and then take a diagonal jump further forward, going right to left, and pull it through. So then my not very neat stitches, try to do it in a contrasting colour, but I don't know if that's helping. My tiny stitches are straight, and you've just got little bubbles on the other side. Now obviously if you were doing this on linen coloured fabric, you'd have linen coloured thread and those stitches would be almost invisible, but for the sake of the video I needed something that was going to be as visible as possible. And you would just keep working your way along like that. I guess some people might make their diagonal stitch the big one and then catch up little threads and bit of the edge in a straight. In a straight stitch that goes from right to left. That might be easier, to be honest. I think it's just personal preference. So there you can see that the stitches on the, focus it again, the stitches on the wrong side are now the diagonal sloping ones, quite big, but on the right side you've still only got very tiny little dots of stitching just there. So whichever way, whether you choose to make your diagonal stitches the over the top ones, they're not very diagonal, but they're the sort of the ones that stretch and make the progress as you go down the fabric. If you want those to be the ones that go left to right, that's fine. If you can want them to be slightly more hidden, they could be the ones that go right to left underneath there. I think this is whip stitch, so you can correct me if the internet has told you otherwise. That's how I would hem something by hand anyway. It's not a particular skill of mine. I tend to not be able to make my right side stitches very small, so it always looks a little bit clumsy, but I'm sure practice makes perfect. So that is hemming. I hope it makes some sense.